Welcome to the Orange Pew. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the September edition of the Orange Pew. We're excited that you're with us, and today we are excited to be able to bring a special guest from Thailand to be with the CLA family. He's no stranger to our Rev congregation in Langley because they did a short-term mission with him. Welcome, Zach Wylie.
Zach Wylie.
Thanks for having us. My wife just dropped
great.
me off here. Kids are on their way to lunch and a water park, and then I get to jump on an airplane in a few hours. And
You're heading
head
home
back
back
to
to
being
Thailand.
here.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Mangoes and smiles.
Well, we are glad that you were able to make some time, and we have this network, this podcast for our network, POC, and you are a POC global worker. So not only for CLA is this good, but this is also good because you get to introduce yourself to others across
The
Canada.
world.
Greetings and salutations.
Maybe not the world, but maybe the world.
Let's start with, and I know your story intimately because we were pastoring in West Kelowna when you became a follower of Jesus Christ. So you did not come from a Christian home. Youth ministry
Yep.
was particularly important in its high school outreach to reach you and bring you into relationship with Christ. So first, tell us how you found Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Whenever we talk about the West Side, I always want to go to Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, West Philadelphia, but West Kelowna, born and raised
That's
on
funny.
a playground. This is where I spent most of my days. Yeah, as you noted, just a small town kid growing up in West Kelowna. Had some friends who were going to youth, and as youth did at that time, you'd go for sleepovers. And if you went for sleepovers at somebody who was a church kid's house, and you might had to do some religious ritual stuff. And so my friend Will Martin was having a sleepover with me. I was having it with him, and his parents said, "Hey, we're going to church tomorrow. If you sleep over, you come in there." I said, "Yeah, sure." And the next morning, Will reminded me that in order to get free French fries at another church that was in Kelowna at the time, you had to memorize these words. And so I memorized the words, and we tried to make sure we were at the front of the line because it was long enough that if you memorize the words, you got out. You got next to Burger Bear next door, and you got your free fries, and then you got back in. And so I came to discover that that was actually memory verses. And so it was with that family and a number of others that had small groups on Stonegate Court where we fired orange hockey balls off the side of the Tingstad small group members' cars. And it was those people who began to show me a little bit about Jesus. And so friends invited to sleep over, and then a sleepover led to conversations of faith, and conversations of faith led to changing in my vocabulary from like the bad four-letter words to the Christian versions of heck and shoot and that kind of stuff, and then got plugged into a youth ministry and slowly began moving my way away from other things that were consuming my time, and beginning to develop relationship with people who weren't just playing sports or doing drama. And it was actually during a time, I think it was called like Big Dreams 99. We were in the basement of the Holiday Inn, which was next door, and we used to run across the parking lot of the church and jump the Holiday Inn. They're doing renos on that right now, by the way. Wall and swim in their hot tub and pool, but this time we got to legitimately use it. And it was actually Derrick Koch, who was a youth pastor at the time.
Yeah, Derrick. Shout
And
out.
so Derrick and Iris Lee, and we were in the basement of the Holiday Inn having a big dreams conversation around what are we dreaming for our city. So I had just come to faith, and now I'm at this thing called Big Dreams. And I remember for the first time like opening my Bible and to a portion of scripture, Philippians 1:21, to live is Christ, to die is gain, and going to Derrick being like, what does this mean? And that began a series of those kinds of conversations that happened there. But a year before that, I was trying to sleep, and I heard the like whimpering of a sibling, which was my older sister. And at the time, we just helped give each other long-term scars on our body from scratches and fights or physical touches of affirmation. Anyways, and I walked out and I kind of crawled around the corner, and my sister was sitting on the couch with this girl named Jessica Jansen holding her hands, doing something that I'd never seen done in my home, which was prayer. And she was praying. And I later discovered that it was actually that evening at youth that something transformative. She gave her life to Christ there, and she was praying for our family in the basement of my home.
So
And
good.
I was like, what the heck is this? And what's going on? Little did I know that a year later I would be coming to faith. And so an answer to that prayer. And then my brother. And then one Christmas youth presentation at Emmanuel, there was a call or a reminder to the community that we're doing a Easter play, and those who might want to sing in the choir or be acting were welcome to come and try out. And my dad said with confidence, I'm going to go try out for the Easter play. And I thought, why are you going to go to the church and try out for the Easter play?
Wow.
And I think he went through the whole thing, and he became
Pilate.
Pontius Pilate and Peter. So he had two critical roles in the Easter play, and I don't think he made choir.
Not a believer. Your dad wasn't.
No, he wasn't a believer.
Not yet,
And
but he got saved.
Yeah, so he was
through that Easter event.
he was cut from the choir, but given Peter and Pilate. And then I think it was one of the knights got down, realized what was happening, walked it through the center aisle, weeping to the back, and ended up having a conversation and had given his life to Christ. And my mom had a bit of a Catholic experience background, and she would say that she had believed in God and had made a commitment to him, but this was the first time that it became something that was for her individually and our family. And so I watched as sister, brother, dad, mom, extended family, and then our youth ministry began to see friends on sports teams and drama classes, music classes, a history teacher, biology teacher. I think our principal of the school basically said, here's the keys, as we launched something in high school called Deep End, where the principal said, you can use the gymnasium for free the last Friday of every month. And we would take up offerings throughout the course of the month for $5 hot and ready pizzas for Little Caesars next door. And we watched as friend after friend began to give their life to Christ. And so graduating high school and heading to Bible college for what I thought would be a year, I went there thinking everyone just experienced that. Little did I know that I had witnessed the closest thing to revival that I had ever seen. And those conversations that had begun in the bottom of the Holiday Inn, and those prayer meetings that had begun walking around the school and in the bottom of the Holiday Inn, and putting white chalk names on black pieces of paper as we prayed for our friends, and then having the joy of being able to flip them over and write them in white as we watched friend after friend and family after family member coming to Christ, inclusive of teachers and people in the community. So, man, looking back on it now, it was a wild time.
Using the Fresh Prince thing.
Yeah,
Thank you, Will.
Yeah, thank you.
It was your friend Will.
It was.
Just invited you to youth group, right?
You've made the connection. I'm going to have to tell him that.
But it was just an invite.
Yeah, it was an invitation.
For fries.
For fries, for a sleepover. Yeah, Jesus did that one time, invited them to come and follow, and it was their first sleepover that something happened. So maybe we need to do that more. More sleepovers, more fries.
I don't know, but Mark and Maureen,
Yeah.
Your parents, might be watching this. So we spent 17 years in Emmanuel Church in West Kelowna and saw over 500 people baptized in water. And your family was one of those highlights. And your dad went on to become a deacon and a treasurer at Emmanuel Church. Your mom was very involved.
Sorry to interrupt you. He went and did his master's.
He did his master's too.
Master's in Christian study, just for kicks and giggles, and he had to intern at the church. So I think he was on part-time staff as well. So,
your family story is amazing.
Yeah.
And there were lots of stories like that in West Kelowna. It was a time of revival, and the church was growing exponentially. But your soul also was growing exponentially. You talked about going to Bible college.
Yeah.
And there was a sense of ministerial call.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that.
I think it began, the first history maker at the time was called Youth Convention. We'd gone to Kamloops, came back, and there was an opportunity to give testimony of what was going on. And I'd never heard that word before. And the person who was supposed to give testimony wasn't there. And I think it was Janet Jansen who was like, you go, share. And so I went on stage and shared about, I don't even remember what it was that I had learned or experienced at that time when I came off. And Janet's like, oh, you're going to be a pastor one day. And I was like, I have no idea what that means. The people that I see in my life, great, cool, but that's not in our history. That's not who we are. And so when thinking of heading to high school at the time, applied for universities, bursary scholarship stuff, but I was still rather new in my faith and thought, I got to get grounded in this before I go out. The statistics of people walking away from their faith within their first couple of years of university was just starting to float at that time. And so there's people from our youth ministry who had gone to Bible college and participated in this thing called Omega, which you had started. Yep. And a 1-year ministry, exposure and global awareness, was that? Yeah. And what it stood for. And I thought, okay, I can do a year. But then I got to go to university after, and it was that year traveling across Russia. We landed in Moscow and got on
Wow.
a 24-hour train ride to Eastern Russia, Perm, and I had got a perm to go to Perm. It was a horrible decision for my life, but I remember looking at the Omega director at the time. His name was Joel Spiridigliazzi, and said, "Joel, one day we're going to take your job." And so as I was wrapping up the year in Omega, it wasn't a loud voice. It was just a come back for another year kind of moment. And it's like, I got to go to like university, but like, okay, like what's one more year? Trinity Western at that time, I think, was doing something called 2+2. So I could go to Bible college for 2 years and I could jump to Trinity. And, but that year I interned in Omega. So I was like a 19-year-old kid. And I remember the application form to be an intern. It sat on my desk, and I was trying to win in like NHL, like 2001. And my roommate, Chris Tingstad, said like, "Zach, are you going to fill that out?" And I was like, yeah, I'll get to it. I got to win the cup first. And it got a phone call on like a landline. And it was Sega Jones, who was the assistant director. She said, "Zach, we're doing interviews right now. You can put in your application." I was like, "Got to win the cup, Sega." And so she said, "Come on down now and bring your application." So I rushed to finish the application form. And I asked my roommate, like, it's like, "What's one of your strengths?" And he said, "Winning the cup." So I wrote, "Winning the cup," and went down, and just youthful arrogance and ridiculousness at the time, but went down there and was really challenged, like, take this seriously, and maybe God has something for your life that's more than winning a cup. And so the thought of interning the next year was a bit of a crazy idea, because it required discipling other people and leading small groups and leading a team to 2 different things during the course of the week, probably something in the local church, something in the community. And I was like, how am I going to do something like that? Like, one day I was a captain of a hockey team when I was 14 years old, but that's a few years behind me. But yeah, it was the faith, belief, and the encouragement of them in that moment, just like it was Derrick, a coach, when sitting on the couch in his office one day, where I said, "You know, the only difference between you and me, and you being a pastor and me, is that you have a piece of paper on your wall." And he should have hit me, and instead he just said, "You're right. So like, go and be that." And so this sense of desire to see friends and family and community come to know Christ overflowed from family to community to high school, then into Abbotsford. And so I finished 4 years at the Bible college. Pastor Fred was the pastoral theology director at the time, and I interned in Omega for 3 years, and then was a student in that program, and got to travel all over the world and watch little glimpses of the same things that I'd seen happening in my hometown, and then in the hearts of the students that were in Omega. And thought a similar thought that I had when I was 15 years old and had gone on a missions trip to Mexico with the Alliance Church, where I sat there and thought, I think I could do this for the rest of my life. And yeah, so graduated Bible college, and wanted to go redeem a branch of the UN. So I was like, I got to go to Bible college. I'm going to finish, and then I'm going to go work for the UN. And Joel was leaving and said, "You should really think about directing Omega." I'm like, I'm 21. Like, people who do this are older. I don't have a master's. I've been waiting to head to Africa. And I got a job, a volunteer position there with an organization in Kenya. And a few months after being there, was invited to go to South Sudan, which was the goal. I had loved Invisible Children and following all the stuff that was happening, and the SPLA and Invisible Children and what was happening in northern Uganda. And found myself there working at a hospital with an older couple, feeling like this is it. And then came back to Canada for what I thought would just be a short stint. And God said, "Wait." And I'm like, my dreams are in the hand. What are we waiting for? And that's where that conversation that I had on the train heading to Siberia came back. I think one day I'll take your job, Joel. And so I'd reached out to Summit and said, "I'm back for a month. Anything I can do to help? Like, need any recruitment?" They're like, "Sure. Can you go to History Maker? Omega's in China right now." And then a few weeks later, had a conversation with Dave as I was waiting, and he said, "Would you consider taking on the role of director of Omega?" I'm like, I haven't even turned 22 yet, and I don't have my master's. And once again, like an opportunity and bit of faith in me that I don't think I fully had at that time, and the willing to risk, was, let's try for a year. And then I got to just continue to practice what we were doing in high school at the time, seeing God's call in people's life, trying to create space and opportunity for them to hear and see what that would look like as a director, deploying people in our community and the city and our country and then around the world. And yeah, and getting to be part of something both local but international.
And 1 year turned into what, Zach?
8. Yeah, 1 year turned into 8, and marriage and a couple kids. Yeah.
I'm going to get you to introduce your family. We'll
Yeah.
hopefully put up a picture. But before we do that, you did recruitment for Omega. Obviously, 30 years ago, I started the program with a real passion to see young adults experience a deeper level of discipleship and ministry in the local church context and taking them overseas.
Yeah.
And all 3 of my children, to my shock and surprise, went through Omega.
Yeah.
And
Tori was one of my students.
our oldest daughter. So you got a moment right now. Why should young adults, maybe before college or university or in the midst of trying to find themselves, why should they go and do Omega?
Because you're never going to have the same kind of opportunity as you do now to discover more about who you are, who God is, and how that connects to the entirety of the world. And we continue to see there needing to be spaces for people like them to understand who they are and who God is in the local church, and be given opportunity to not just think about God, but really know who he is, not just think about who they are, but really get to know who you are, and not just be involved in what's happening from a cerebral point, like an hour here, 2 hours there, your thought, but like have practical experience doing that. And so the thing that excites me most about seeing students who came through Omega for 1 year is that there are youth leaders, kids leaders, elders, deacons, board members. They're serving all different parts of the world, and it started because they had a practical encounter with the local church, with the local community, but then they had a very deep and divine encounter with who God is, showing them who they are. And I think there are very few places in the world that provide an opportunity like that, and Omega continues to be one of those. And so the fruit of that is enough for me. Yeah.
Register today.
Yeah.
Now,
Register
Doug, you
today.
work there. So you're the overseer of pastoral theology, which is the degree that you ended up doing, right?
Yeah.
So, but what do you see in the 1 year students in the Omega program?
I don't know if I can nail it better than what Zach said. I mean, I think it's just an opportunity to rid yourself of selfishness and to explore the call of God on someone's life. Like, I think what you described too, Zach, and I've heard this expression before, is that short term leads to midterm, leads to long term, right?
I like
so it was a short term experience that you had.
Yeah.
And I know that there's lots of conversation around short term missions. Is it healthy? Is it not? I don't know if we have a lot of like accepting missionaries around the world for teams.
Sure.
But I think it's still important.
Absolutely.
It's led to you being the leader of Imagine Thailand.
Yeah.
I think that's what happens to young people when they get out of the North American model and see the world.
Yeah. I mean, I think young people want to experience something. I mean, they watch enough flicking through reels, but when they get to enter into that reel, that they scroll through really fast, and that's it. Like, Omega students do more experiential learning than a 4-year Bible college student does in 4 years. They do in a year. Omega gives over 10,000 hours of volunteer time.
Unless you're a pastoral theology student and you do internships.
Yeah, but sorry, are we allowed to be critical here? But even then, you're entering into the most unrealistic time of the church calendar, which is the summer. And so when you're in Omega, you're at a local church for like 6 to 8 hours a week, and volunteering in the local community for 6 to 8 hours a week, and you're in small group, and you're doing everything that you would be doing in 4 years in a year.
Okay,
so I love what they're doing, but it's intense.
Omega is going to be helping Pastor Bryce plant the Abbotsford campus this month.
Yeah.
And we're very excited about their involvement in our campus.
Awesome.
So now, Zach, before we move to your current deployment, can you introduce your family, and we'll put up a picture of your wife and kids?
Yeah. So my wife's name is Megan, and we just celebrate 15 years in 6 days. And 15 years. And we've got 3 kids. Ella's 12. Turning 13, she's going to be a teenager in June of next year. And then our middle son, Isaiah, is 9, and our youngest is Isra. And so when we left, our middle 2, or our eldest 2, were like 3 and a bit and 1 and a bit, or almost 2 and almost 4. And then our youngest, Isra, his name is a fusion of Ezra and Isra, which is Thai for freedom, was born in Thailand 6 years ago. So he spent more of his life there than he has here. So yeah, Megan's background, she's actually in maternal health. So she just finished a master's in public health. But when we launched there, she was a doula, and was working in kind of the public healthcare and private healthcare system there in Thailand, and then became a personal trainer with a focus on those in maternal health as well. And all of that has kind of culminated towards this desire of equitable health is the term of it. And so, yeah.
Now, the reality is that most PAOC, Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada, global workers, they go somewhere and they work on behalf of the network.
Yeah.
But you're unique because you've gone to Thailand to run a large and complex organization called Imagine Thailand.
Right.
Now, that is ultimately, I guess, under the POC.
Yeah.
You are a partner of CLA, and I'm sure probably other churches like Colwood in the BCYD. Can you define and explain Imagine Thailand?
Sure. So Imagine Thailand actually started, we stole the name Erdo Thailand. And that happened because Boxing Day 2004 happened.
Okay.
And Thailand
So
was one of the nations that had been impacted by that.
The tsunami.
Yep, the tsunami. And so it was started by a youngish couple, Peter and Cavell Dove, in the early 2000s.
Okay, so and Peter, and speaking of Orange Pews.
Yeah, Peter probably was maybe born on this one.
Yes, he has commented many times. He listens, and isn't it comfortable?
I mean, the scent of him, it might still
Yeah,
be
yeah,
here.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, so
he's
they
from
had
CLA.
started it. He was a
Yeah.
CLA boy.
Little
She was a
creepy.
Newfoundland gal. Met in a university when Peter was at UBC. Move over there as missionaries when the PAOC tells you where you're going. And so they had landed in a place where PAOC said, hey, you're going to be here in Thailand, and then began to pioneer ministry. Cavell's work was with the Canadian government, which was like a miracle of stories. And Peter was working with the local Thai church at the time, pioneering campus ministry. And then the Boxing Day happened and tsunami hit, and they were able to marry at a kitchen table this relief and development and discipleship that was happening on university campus together.
Wow.
And so Imagine Thailand is all about, this is like if we're in the elevator, Imagine Thailand's all about building strong communities. And we do that in 4 locations in 4 ways. But we do that in 4 locations, the north all the way to the south. And I'll give you a quick snapshot on those. And then 4 different things. And so what started as relief and development, so like water, sanitation, hygiene, and discipleship, university students, and leadership development, that's the 3rd one. And so working with universities and university students, and then even those who are young entrepreneurs in the country, and mobilizing them to action. And so we do leadership development, education, and so I'll talk to you a little bit about that, the community development stuff, water, sanitation, hygiene, and then all of that's kind of undergirded by discipleship, a desire to see the 1%, 94% Buddhist, 5% Muslim, 1% Christian, meet Christ and then become disciples who disciple others. And what's super cool, and it's one thing when you get to say this one time and then it stops, but when you get to say it a 2nd, 3rd, 4th time and it's happening, Christianity in Thailand is still growing at a faster rate than population growth. And so like missiologists would say like we're in or on the brink of revival. And so 70 million people in a place the size of British Columbia. And so Imagine's work is spread out from like north to south. And so in the north of Thailand, we work in a place called Mae Sot, which is home to one of the oldest and largest refugee camps in the world. At its peak, over 550,000. And so what began as water, sanitation stuff, soy milk, then led to some families doing sabbatical. Actually, Derrick and Sarah Lee, Iris Lee Koch and family were there, and then the Hansen family were there. They helped pioneer discipleship training stuff where we were helping Burmese migrants gain access to education, discipleship, and leadership development, and then giving them practical tools to go back and make a difference in their country when the hopeful, at the time, Myanmar would open up. And then in Bangkok...
Can we just stop there?
Yeah.
So Myanmar, Burma, continues to
what a
be
mess.
A very significant trouble spot. And so I just want our listeners and those who are watching, especially those who are part of the CLA network, to know that your giving to missions at CLA every month supports Zach to be in Thailand, and in some small way, you're having an impact in the Myanmar conflict.
Yeah.
So you continue
Yeah.
to work with
So
Myanmar
just quick
refugees.
snapshot. Like in the last 6 months now, over 50,000 illegal refugees have fled over the border because the government re-engaged the idea of conscription. And people are like, I don't want to take up arms against my own family. And so a lot of these were 18 to 20-something-year-olds. So I had been doing some teaching in Myanmar at the time, and some of our students have been murdered or are in prison or have joined the CDM, Civil Disobedience Movement. And so, those people have flooded over the border. But then some would say upwards of 200,000, so between 100 and 200,000 in the last 18 months have come over. And so those people need food and clothing and medical care and access to clean drinking water and education, and the list goes on. And so through your support of us and then the support of others, we're continuing to try to meet those immediate needs, but then also be involved in something that's a little bit long term. And so if you're following us on Facebook or Instagram, or follow Pilimoy, who's our founder, country director, and we call her the Mother Teresa of Thailand, she just posted, she just engineered a floating solar panel pump water filtration system. And so imagine if you're a refugee fleeing your government who's bombing you and you need access to clean drinking water. Like, how do you get that? And so there's portable systems that we develop, but then there's larger groups of families and even these medical centers that are moving with these refugees. And so we pioneered like a wheelbarrow that's got a solar panel that hooks up to batteries that store the power, that then hooks up to a pump that's able to begin to filter water from the area to provide clean drinking water for the community that's fleeing what's happening. And so then we began training both pastors and then local leaders on the Thai side of things to be able to service those water filtration systems. And so it's neat that they're able to go into the camp, because as a foreigner, that's not possible. And so some Thais, but predominantly Burmese, are allowed to go into these camps that are open for a few days at a time and then they close. And people are like, what do you mean? Well, the Thai government doesn't recognize people as refugees, and so it's seen as illegal aliens. And so if you don't sign on to the conventions that the UN and the rest of the world subscribes to, then you don't have to offer people medical, education, or basic human rights. You can just say, you're here on a tourist visa, just like we would arrive. Yeah, you're here for a bit. You're allowed to stay for 30, 60 days, and then you got to go back. They're like, we're not here as tourists. We're here to go back to our country, but bombs are dropping on the other side of the river. They're like, well, if there's 72 hours of quiet, then you got to go back. So then they go back, and they're in a holding camp on that side, and then shooting and bullets and bombs start flying again. And then they wade across the river, which is sometimes ankle deep, sometimes waist or shoulders. And then they're in another camp for a period of time. And then they wait until the bombs and bullets stop, and then they go back and forth. So, I mean, we've been there just this last year. We're providing clean drinking water to over 500,000 people now, and over a couple hundred like large systems, but then almost 1,000 small portable systems since 2008, which is when our first clean drinking water system went in. And
Okay, so MESOT's an important humanitarian relief effort for you guys. Bangkok, just briefly, explain the work in the university.
Bangkok, city of 14 million people, roughly 9 million voting, so big place, home to most of the major universities. The first one opened like 107 years ago. It's called Chulalongkorn University. And when Imagine began with the local church at the time, pioneering campus ministry there, they chose Chulalongkorn University because it was the first, and it's like the Harvard of Thailand. So it's the premier school. You graduate, you get extra salary as a result of it. You hold a thing called a pink card, which guarantees you a slightly better job than those that are there. And so let's try to reach students who are already destined to make a difference where they are. And so started University Campus Ministry, and in 2008 opened up a coffee shop called Passport Cafe, where we could take conversations from the classroom. That was a miracle. They'd been invited to teach a leadership development in the Faculty of Pharmaceutical Science. And we're like, how do we take what's in the classroom into a shop? And then that turns into English corners and games nights and service trips, taking students from there up to MESOT to open their eyes to what's going on in their own country. And down south at Takwapa, where the tsunami had hit, and we had opened a learning center in 2000 and the end of 2004. And so here, this Bangkok becomes the hub of sending university students, Christians and non-Christians, together to meet Jesus along the way or at the destination and then come back. And so fast forward to 2024, and we're in partnership with a coffee shop called Entrance. and a local church called Deeper Life Church, where students come in and they're there for coffee. They're there for the recording studio that's there. And in 2020, we opened an education project called Samyan, New Gen. The community that we're in is called Samyan. Over 30 students a week there, like 20 on the waiting list. We got over 100 volunteers a week that are from the university and then the local preps high school, which is there. And so just like super cool. And through that, we're able to help launch a kids ministry at our partner church that meets in the coffee shop on Sunday afternoons. And so it's this community space that exists right next to the university. And it's a space where we continue to lead outreach related stuff that's there, but then host small groups, a local church, kids ministry, youth stuff that's happening there. And it's because there's a coffee shop and a recording studio and a co-working space. And so our work in Bangkok, university students, leadership development, and now local church.
Now, particularly important to CLA is your third site in Takwapa because we just sent our Rev Youth there.
Yeah.
So CLA, whether you realize it or not, you helped purchase a new playground for Takwapa, and you talked about this is the area where the tsunami took place, and that's how this ministry began.
Sure.
But tell us about Takwapa. Tell us what Rev Youth Short-Term Mission did.
Yeah.
I know that CLA raised $5,000, I think, for the camp or something. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so Takwapa, small community north of Phuket. So when people think Thailand and beaches, they think Phuket Island. And about an hour and a half north of that is where the tsunami had the greatest amount of impact in Thailand. And just past there was this small fishing community called Takwapa. And that became ground zero for tsunami relief when it had hit. And rather than offering water and medical supplies, the government said, we need a safe place for the kids to continue to learn. They're trying to find their moms and dads and aunts and uncles and brothers and sisters who had been swept out to sea or were somewhere in the hospital, and they needed a safe place to learn. So university students from Bangkok are skipping university to go down south and help open this learning center. Fast forward 20 years, and you've got 60 to 100 kids a day getting free after-school education Monday to Friday. And then about 7 years ago, we launched a kids ministry on Saturdays, like a Saturday kids club, and there's a couple dozen kids that have been coming to that. And then this last year, we've been talking about it for some time, like what do we do with these kids who kind of age out, meaning like they get more than 13, 14 because our learning center doesn't go beyond that age of tutoring because the education is a bit different at that point. And so our leader there, her name was Thak and her husband's name was Day, they said, we feel like God's telling us to start a youth ministry. And we're like, yes, we've been talking about this for a long time, but it came from the locals and nationals have a vision for it. Let's roll. And then they're like, but we never like went to Bible college and we didn't grow up in a local church. So we don't even know what youth ministry looks like. We don't even know what like camp looks like. It's like, we know the right people for this. So CLA had reached out and said, hey, we're interested in coming. I said, would you be willing to help us learn how to run a youth ministry and youth camp? And Brendan and Brianne were like, yeah, sure. And so that began, So that began and on like a bunch of pre-conversations and then there. And so we had 100 people go to camp. And what was super cool is at camp, there were 3 girls that were baptized. And 2 of the girls that were baptized had actually began to be supported by CLA Kids. And so Maple Ridge and CLA Kids had began to support these girls over 6 years ago. So they were coming to our learning center when they were like 8, 9 years old. And like fast forward, they're now in high school. And then we launched youth ministry and they're part of the worship team. So they're part of the worship team, which then joined Brendan for a bit of the time when he was there. And then, Brendan and Brianne were able to, with our Thai staff there, be able to baptize these girls that were there, which is like a super cool connection. But those kids are there. The kids who came to our thing is because we're in like 7 to 8 different schools that are around the community because of the stuff that we do at the center Monday through Friday and then Saturday. But then because there's teams like CLA who also jump into schools and help teach English, and they did a leadership camp for us. So they were running a leadership camp based on servant leadership principles at this high school where we were able to invite them as well. And so now our youth ministry is like 12 to 30. And this just started we were doing once a month until CLA came. And then after we've been doing it every single week. And at the camp, there was like about 12 Muslim students that had come from one of the schools where we've been doing Christmas presentation stuff that come, and now they're involved in our youth ministry as well. And so, you guys helped catalyze stuff that was happening a long time ago and then help be part of something that was happening a short time ago, but it's linking very much so into what's happening now. And so now those girls are developing some of our other small group leaders, and they're beginning to get vision because there's conversation around what do we do in our high school. I've never heard of a Thai high school having some sort of like outreach thing that's happening there. And so, so like super grateful and thankful for that and
Zach.
multiplication.
Doug wants us a couple questions about just global workers and missions in general. But I want to observe that it's come full circle.
Yeah.
So you were a part of a high school outreach in West Kelowna.
Yeah.
And it's come full circle now. You are catalytic to releasing high school outreach in Takwapa, Thailand.
It's a good observation.
And
Thank you, Will.
Yeah,
that's
you, Will.
pretty amazing. And we're proud of the work that you're doing with Imagine Thailand, and we're proud that you're a partner of CLA and that we get to support you every month, but also support you through short-term mission.
Yeah.
And I think Rev really wants to establish a spring break routine where you guys would be able to take short-term teams from CLA at spring break to use them in this camp context. So that's super cool. Doug, you wanted to talk a little bit about the future of missions.
I'm just glad that you hosted them too, Zach. Like I think it takes a lot of work to host a short-term missions.
I was admittedly
So
a
awesome.
very small part of it, and that's been one of the fun things. We talk about the nationalization of missions. How do we get ownership at that point? And so our team were key hosts in that, and I started at the beginning with high level of involvement, and by the end it was them, and that was part of our hope. Actually, a number of years after, in our first 2 years when we left, we kept on saying, when you think of us, think of them. When you think of us, think of them. When you think of us, think of them. And that was the goal, to kind of move from in front, beside, and behind. And so now the team knows our team there better than they know me, and they love them more than they love us.
That's a perfect model.
Win for me. Yeah.
Like we talk about the pipeline here in BC quite a bit. Derrick and I have talked about it on this podcast.
Like leadership pipeline.
Leadership pipeline. And I know missions is changing. Like around the world, less people from North America are needed overseas because of theological training and expertise on the field. Do you see that in Thailand? Like, you must have an amazing team.
I love the words you just said.
You must have an amazing team there.
Yeah.
That succession is not probably based on another North American person coming, but is that your model?
Well, like
hopefully.
Lee Moy.
Yeah. Like you see people, Thai nationals who are like exceptional leaders.
Yeah, better than. Yeah, well, they get the culture more. They get the language better. They understand the religious context and temperature better than we ever could. Yeah. So I definitely think we've turned a page in a lot of different parts of the world on what mission looks like presently and future. I think someone was just talking about like getting on the bus and making room on the bus. And in order to make room on the bus, you have to get off the bus. And it's kind of the same for missions. There's a lot of people who have done incredible stuff, but it's time to move from in front to beside, and from beside to behind. And you might not even have to be on the scene. Like, eventually you got to die and become compost soil for something else to grow. And so, within our context, what's really cool, to use those two words that you just said, want and need. A couple of years ago, just after COVID hit, our country director, Lee Moy, who was there at the beginning of Imagine Thailand, said like, hey, Zach, like when you first came, we didn't want you, but we needed you. And I was like,
I'm not offended.
What do you mean?
Those
And she's
good
like, well,
words.
like we loved Peter and Cavell, and but they had moved to Myanmar 6 years before we came, and we're trying to help lead an organization from afar, and they're doing the best that they could doing it. But they're like, we needed somebody to help come and work alongside of us. Now we don't need you, but we want you.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, that's actually kind of makes me feel warm inside. Like, oh, okay. So then, to me, it's kind of confusing when, as Christians, we're like, oh yeah, we're really struggling with this whole leadership pipeline, succession planning. Like, isn't the whole of what we're about, like the Great Commission, isn't it about that? And so when we struggle with that in local churches and in NGOs, it's confusing to me. And then we could talk about that in a whole other podcast. But it's neat to be able to come into an organization, one where you feel slightly needed. And so that's good for the ego. But then when you're able to work with people who are then able to say to you, yeah, like we don't need you anymore, but we want you.
Yeah, that's lovely.
And so even when we came in, we were like, well, how do we get to that point in place? What kind of competencies are needed? What kind of decision-making models are needed? We began to identify our vision, value stuff again. We had a guy named John Kaplan come in and lead us through some of that. And our country director, Lemoy, was like weeping in one of our last sessions. We're like, Lemoy, what's wrong? She's like, I felt like I've been lying to people for the last few years. Like, what do you mean? She's like, I just didn't know how to describe what we do and like why we do it. And sometimes I just felt like I had to say what I thought we were doing, why we were doing it. But now I can give language to it. And so like they're the torch holders and carriers of this. And as the leader, I get to stand behind them and say like, yeah, that's right. Like do that again. And COVID accelerated the lack of need of me. Before that, very hierarchical Asian culture. Like we need you on the ground in these government meetings, military, education directors. We integrate a lot in different parts of the government, and it was needed. You're there. But I'd show up in these places. I'm still the youngest by 2030. I was 30 years old when I moved to Imagine Thailand, and when I moved to Thailand to work with Imagine Thailand. So I was still young and naive and was having to sit in these like places with people considerably older than me. But I would always say, I can come to the meeting, but I need to bring one of my staff with me. And they're like, okay. And so we'd bring like the director of the area who was younger and sometimes older than me as well. And eventually we got to the place where I didn't need to be in those meetings anymore. And COVID meant that I couldn't fly to those places. And so we did Zoom stuff, but it all of a sudden, like it tested all of the principles that we were trying to put in place, all of the time and energy that we spent on vision, mission, value stuff to get to that point. And so, yeah, it's opened a ton of new potential avenues of opportunity for our organization as a result of that.
I think it's a great model, Zach.
Yeah.
It's not that you don't have to get off the bus, but you're more of a like, okay, I'm going to make sure the tires are okay. And
sure.
Like the mechanics behind it. And
bring it into the
when
yard.
you have less to prove, you push other people ahead.
Yeah.
And that's good. I have a question just about logistics.
Yeah.
Like it's so important that CLA, as a church, we're supporting you monthly. But I don't know if most people know like the model of funding and what that's like for the missionary. Yeah. Like I think maybe 20 years ago, it was a centralized model where we would give our tithes to national office, and national office would be like, give you a salary and make sure you're okay and bring you back every few years.
They could only hire so many people.
Only so many people. But it's not like that anymore. Like I mean, obviously, the amount that you've given us in this podcast, there's a lot on your plate.
Yeah.
But you also are responsible for raising the funds to support yourself in Thailand.
And the projects.
And the projects. It's massive. I remember Marie Cornelius, the leader of the missions in Canada, said...
Mission Global.
He said, when I asked him about the model, he said, I feel like a used car salesman sometimes. I'm always like working, and it's like two roles at the same time. Yeah. So explain that model maybe to the CLA network.
Yeah, sure.
The amount of work and just the importance of churches finding PAOC missionaries to support like you guys.
So the model changed before I got there, and I was told coming in like, hey, at least 20% of your time is going to have to be given to like communications and maintaining donors and raising new ones. If we owned a company in Canada, our employees would need raises. If we lived in Canada, our food would be more expensive, our rent would be more expensive, fuel would be more expensive. And the same thing happens in Thailand. And so it would mean that every year we'd be needing to raise an extra 3% or 5%.
Like inflation.
Inflation as our cost of living increases. So that exists in the same way. And so there is a ton of time that goes into that. But early on we were like, if that's the case, and we're taking on an organization of like 20 staff and 4 different sites working all the country, and we got projects. When you're involved in relief and development, that's like unlimited. You're constantly trying to raise money from people. But we're like, I can't keep asking the same people. Somebody once said, like, you squeeze the lemon dry and you just keep squeezing the same lemons and that's it. And so when we left, we're like, okay, how do we get our organization to a place where they're not dependent on the Canadian church and donors and people? What would it look like if we came back to Canada and said, hey, for every dollar that you give, we match it with in-country dollar this way? And so we left with that mindset. And just before COVID hit, we could say, hey, for every dollar that CLA gave, we were raising 60 cents in Thailand. And so that became $1.60. And now in some of our sites, we're actually over. So we're like at 1.5. And so we had to get get creative in that. And so there's a recording studio and coffee shop that helps generate income that keeps things low. In the deep south of Thailand, which we didn't talk about, Hat Yai, predominantly Muslim area, we've got a language center and a coffee shop, and that generates income for us to do stuff there, subsidizes it. Our learning center in Takwapa, we're in the throngs finally of probably opening that into like an early childhood education center in the morning, which allows more influence in schools and staff, but helps fund what's happening in the afternoon. In Mae Sot, the water stuff that P. Limoy does, we try to give a day a week to commercial, residential, industrial installations so that we can pay there. So now all of our Thai staff are paid in Thai baht. So when CLA gives, it's going to like projects and stuff that we're doing, but it's being matched by something that's there. So it's rare now that churches and people who support Imagine are like 100% footing the bill. It's actually either seeding for something more to happen. And so it's like, oh, we need to hire a couple new staff. Well, we know there's income there, which gives us the motivation to then make sure that we can begin paying them there. And so, yeah, so a big chunk of our time is gone. Like our budget actually has decreased since we've moved overseas because our money that we're getting inside Thailand has increased through corporate social responsibility programs, through grants, through engaging with the local church. Like there's a ton of money there. And so we're just like asking God for the creativity on how to engage them, and then the faith to follow him into those spaces. And so the local church in Canada, I think, is still needed to help support and get behind things, but you're no longer being the one that's always doing 100%. You're not paying for 100% of what's happening. In some cases in countries, that's absolutely needed, but not in every country. And so what would it look like for our local churches in Canada to find a way to partner with the local churches in different parts of the world to say, let's do this together, rather than it's like every time something happens. And that's what happened when we were there. When we started, they're like, we need to do this. We have more water systems to do. Can we message the churches in Canada? And I thought, oh, absolutely. We want the churches in Canada to know it. But like, how do we engage the churches here? How do we engage the Christian community that's here? And so it's more of partnership. You're catalyzing something. You're seeding something. You're not doing like the start, middle, and end of it. You're part of something that's going on. And I think that's needed. And we're in parts of the world now where Canada can't even send money. And so those local missionaries, nationals and expats, are trying to have to find ways to engage that. So we need to begin thinking that way.
I think it's important partnership because the church in Canada, mission dollars are shrinking for a variety of reasons. The church is smaller. The church that the boomers built can't be maintained by millennials. And so even though CLA hits $1 million a year with inflation and all of those things, it's actually a shrinking dollar. And we work super hard even to bring in that money. Yeah. So the fact that the local church in Thailand is doing their part and there are these other rivers of support, so important. Yeah. One last question, and we're almost done. Yeah. And I'm going to go back to something that Doug introduced, and that is leadership development, leadership succession. I was in Thailand 3 months ago with a Thai church, very significant Thai church, and they're in the midst of handing leadership over from Pastor Manuksak, who'd been there for decades, to younger leadership. And you talk about people like Lee Moy, people who are taking over leadership in Thailand with Imagine Thailand. What about here? Yeah. I was a little surprised at General Conference that there wasn't more transition to younger leadership in our movement because of the challenges and opportunities that we're facing. So how does leadership development get passed on, leadership change get passed on here for your generation of global workers?
Good. I think there are some people who are doing it well and others who are doing it poor, and that's like globally. 3 words come to my mind right now. You can give somebody a position, but if they don't have like a platform to use that position or power to use that platform, then it's nothing. And so we need to stop just giving somebody a position and then telling them like, go do something. If we haven't given them the space to do it and we haven't given them the power or the authority to do it, then what difference does it make? Number 2, some people give a position and they give a platform, but they give them no power or influence to make a difference. Micromanaged, everything needs to be gone through them. They haven't had conversations about what empowerment looks like, and they think, well, I delegate and disappear, and then you make a mistake and I tell you what to do. In Thailand, it's the same way. You can give someone a position, you can give someone a platform, but if you don't give them any power and trust to like actually execute on the position in the place that you've given them, if the platform, another word for place is that, then you've handcuffed somebody and essentially put them in a place where they think they've got power, but they have nothing. And eventually they don't feel supported. And as a result of that, they run to another organization. And so culturally in Thailand, we see lots of turnover in this generation as a result of it. And I wonder if we see some of that here. And so I think we need to start that whole leadership development journey with people earlier than later. Instead of being reactive, we talk about being responsible. So if we're actually committed to developing a pipeline, then we do that from the moment that somebody comes into the local church. The military does it. You can be a general. As a result of that, we're committed to actually developing these competencies in you as a leader, to developing this character in you as a leader. We've given thought to it. We've created processes for it, and we're committing dollars and stuff to it, rather than saying, oh, we've hired you and we've given you a position and we've given you a salary, like now go perform and do something. In many ways, we just hire glorified event planners. And then they get somewhere and they're like, no one actually taught me how to do that. There was no clear KPIs, key performance indicators. I wasn't clear on what my objectives were. And so I struggle with that with our own team. And that's why we look to develop stuff like that there. And one of the greatest things that I think, or some of the greatest moments that I had in my leadership journey, was working with people who gave me a position, gave me a platform, a place to make a difference, and then entrusted me with the power to do it and walked it out with me. And so we threw around words like, oh, we need more mentors, not masters. And I still believe in that. And I think you can hold in leadership, an executive leader can still hold the same title, but they shouldn't have the same power that they always had if they're really committed to developing the next generation. And that doesn't have to be an age thing. That just has to be the next person coming in. So as the executive director of Imagine Thailand, if my power meter was 100 when I started, in terms of like things that I have the power to make decisions on now, it's at like 70. Because I've disseminated the power that I have to different people within my team to have the same kind of authority that I have, or more, to make decisions in those places. And so if we're worried of our position being stripped from us, well then just start giving away power to the right people at the right time, and showing them how that's used to come alongside of them. And I think Jesus was the ultimate example of that. Somebody wrote a book years ago that talked about these running the bases. Jesus said, like, come and see. And so he spit in the mud, and the disciple and leadership model was inviting the disciples to come and see. Spits in the mud, heals the person. They're like, wow, this is interesting how Jesus is healing this blind man's eye. Then he says, come and do it with me. And so they come and they feed the thousands of people, and they take the bread, and he prays for it and disseminates it. And then he says, now go and do. And he sends them out 2 by 2, and they come back all excited, and there's a bit of assessment and evaluation. This is all leadership development stuff. And then he says, multiply. But it's not leadership development, it's discipleship. Mm-hmm. And so some pastors and local churches and Christian organizations are scared of the term leadership development, but that's just the business world's ripoff of discipleship. Mm-hmm. And so if we're committed to Christ's model of come and see, come and do, go and do, and then the last one, like multiply. And so it sounds simple, but then, there's a tremendous amount of ego that ends up having to dissipate, and it requires a little bit more forethought. And I remember coming into the Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada and the ordination process, and we had this like 3-year process in order to like get ordained. And mine took a little bit longer because I wasn't thinking about it as often as I should have. But then I thought, like, what do we do to help people finish well? Like, do we have a 3-year exit thing? And so it's cool to hear like, oh yeah, now we begin meeting with leaders there. But like, I've just been hearing from place to place that we've like skipped an entire generation of leaders because we want to hire these young leaders. Like, okay, like how do we not do that again? And so I had incredible examples of people who shared power, who provided a platform, a position, space to do that, and then like let me make mistakes and said like, yeah, this isn't a fail-safe place, this is a safe place to fail. And then said like, and so who are you doing that with right now? And really early on, I remember sitting in a I think it was at district conference, and at the time, I think it was Jeremy Postal who was doing this thing called campus mentoring, and we need to have somebody in our north, and like Barnabas's encouragers, people to our east, like our east and west, and then south, like those who were developing Timothy's, and that stuck with me. And when I look at leaders in my life who I admire, naturally or intentionally, they had those who were above them that were like calling them on and forward, those that were beside them that were calling them out on stuff and encouraging them, but those that they had committed to developing as well. And so I
give it away. Give leadership.
Give it away. Give it away.
Zach, you're an influencer. I just want to encourage you.
Don't post anything. I'm a consumer.
You've influenced a lot of, through Omega, people who respect you. When it comes to personality types, there's an A type. I think you're a triple A type. Like you go.
Insurance, yeah.
You're a force. My question to you is I know that we are wrapping up here, but how can we pray for your family, Zach, but also as a leader overseas, lots on the go? How do you rejuvenate, Zach, and keep yourself healthy as a lead inside? Like, how do you maintain to go the long road?
Yeah.
How do you keep healthy?
Yeah.
And then how can we pray for your family?
Okay, that's a layered question. How do I keep healthy?
In 30 seconds.
Yeah. Well, I spend time with my family.
Yeah.
I've got good friends in my life, and I try to be engaged in activity that allows that kind of stuff to come out. And my mornings are my time.
Great.
So that would be the short thing, my short answer there. For my family, we hear time and time again that the reason why global workers return from the field is usually either because problems with other missionaries or stuff that's happening within their family. And so, right now, glad that our family's well, glad that relationships with others are well. But I think, we use the term vitality, but like relational vitality, I think that's a key point of prayer for us. But then when you say family, my brain thinks of our staff that are in the South, that are in the North, that are grappling with their own stuff within their own families. And when you engage in life in Thailand, in the kind of work that we're doing, your staff aren't staff, they're family. And so that weighs really heavy as I think of the different needs and wants, and then the challenges that they're facing within their own families. And so when I was 18 is my first time being a Omega intern, and my team would say, how can we pray for you? I'd say wisdom, knowledge, and discernment. And I think 21 years on, I would pray for those things again. Yeah.
Thank you, Will.
Yeah.
Thank you, Zach, for coming. We appreciate coming alongside of you as a global worker. We also appreciate a healthy organization, Imagine Thailand, and the way that you are thinking through leadership development and transition. I also am very grateful that both sides of the gospel are very evident in the work that you're doing. So on one side, you tell us stories about young women being baptized in water because their lives have been saved by Jesus. But on the other hand, you talk to us about humanitarian assistance in places of great need like Mesot. And so thanks for doing both sides of the coin and doing it really well. And CLA and POC, you can be very proud of the work that is being done by Zach and the Imagine Thailand team. I want to thank Jabba Productions for assisting us in this production, and I want to invite you to join us next month in October for our next edition. Thanks, Doug, for coming in.
Great being here. Thanks, Zach.
Thanks for dropping by. Have a safe trip back to Thailand, and we look forward to sending a team at spring break.
Let's do it.
Thanks for listening to the Orange Pew. To stay up to date, please subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or YouTube Podcasts. We'll see you next time.